The scent of incense and destiny clung to the air in my father's study. Master Alistair Vance, head of the formidable Vance dynasty, stood before me, his presence both imposing and weary. "Elara," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "A prophecy, centuries old, suggests that a union with a daughter of the Thorn bloodline will secure our family's prosperity and peace for 100 years. Would you consider returning with me to the Vance estate? You may refuse. This is a burden, not a command." My heart, a frantic bird trapped in the cage of my ribs, beat against memories that were not yet a week old. In my mind's eye, I saw not the stern but honorable man before me, but the same man cradling my broken body, his tears falling onto my cold cheeks as my life bled out onto opulent sheets. His final words were a ghostly whisper in my ear: "The Vance trap was sprung by your kin. If fate grants you another dawn, Elara, run from this family and never look back." And fate, in its cruel and curious irony, had done just that. I had awoken that very morning, 6 months in the past, in my own familiar bed, the horror of my wedding night at the Vance Manor still a fresh, searing brand on my soul. In that previous life, I had agreed without a second thought, swayed by a sense of duty and the charming facade of Alistair's eldest son, Cashin. I had married him. And on that very night he and his 2 brothers Julian and Felix had revealed their true nature. They had taken turns not with love, but with a leather belt, their curses of venomous chorus. "You stole this place from our sister Isolde," Cashin had hissed, his handsome face twisted into a mask of hatred. "She is the true heart of this family. You are nothing but a placeholder, a peasant with auspicious blood." I died understanding that all 3 brothers were poisoned by their twisted love for their adopted sister. I died in Alistair Vance's arms, his grief a shocking, genuine thing amidst the betrayal. Now history was repeating its first line. Alistair misread my silence and bitter smile for reluctance. "I have overstepped," he said, sighing. "It is too much to ask of a young woman. Forget my visit. I wish you a fortunate life." He turned to leave. My hand shot out, fingers closing around his wrist with a strength that surprised us both. The memory of his tears, his apology, his desperate attempt to save me, they were the only anchors in this sea of treachery. "Master Vance," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I will join your household. But on one condition. I will forge no bonds with your 3 sons. I will not marry them." Alistair frowned, perplexed. "Elara, matters of the heart are not so easily dismissed. A marriage is a lifelong partnership. You must choose a companion, not a strategy." "My mind is decided," I stated, my gaze unwavering. "If I am to be the Vance bride, I will marry the finest man in the family. I will marry you, Alistair Vance." The air in the room stilled. He was 42, though he carried the vigor and appearance of a man a decade younger. A widower for 12 years, he had never taken another wife after his beloved Eleanor perished in a carriage accident. My previous life's suffering had granted me a terrible clarity. Amidst the vipers in his nest, he alone possessed honor. He was stunned into silence for a long moment, his gray eyes searching mine for a hint of jest. "Do not speak frivolously. I'm too old for you. The gap between us is a chasm." I stepped closer, raising a finger to gently press against his lips, silencing his protest. The gesture was intimate, audacious. "I will not marry another. The choice is yours to make." I saw the war within him, the weight of his family's legacy, the strange intensity of my demand, the prophecy that hung over us all. Finally, his shoulders squared with resolve. For the sake of his family's future, he would bear this strange cross. "If this is the only path," he said, his voice dropping into a solemn, oath-bound tone, "then I, Alistair Vance, swear to you, Elara Thorn, that I will never betray your trust. Let this be my vow. The legacy of the Vance dynasty will be yours to share. I will take you as my wife. If I break this oath, may the skies strike me down and my next life be that of a wretched beast." His words were more than I had hoped for. A sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. But I had one more card to play. "There is another condition. Our engagement must remain a secret until the day we marry. Your 3 sons, they owe a debt from a time they cannot recall. I intend to see it repaid twofold." 2 days later I crossed the threshold of the Vance estate, a gilded cage masquerading as a palace. Cashin Vance was waiting in the grand foyer, a sleek cigarette between his fingers, smoke curling around his head like a malevolent halo. He raised a condescending eyebrow as I entered, malice glinting in his eyes. A stark contrast to the gentle, charming suitor he had pretended to be in my first life. "The prophesied bride arrives," he drawled, his voice laced with a poison I now recognized. "I hope our humble home meets your rustic expectations." I said nothing, merely holding his gaze until a flicker of unease passed through his. The game had begun. The first move came at 3 a.m. I was jolted awake not by noise, but by the acrid, thick smell of smoke. My eyes flew open to see flames licking at the heavy velvet curtains of my assigned room, a large hole already burning through the fabric. In my past life I had been terrified, clutching a pillow and crying until Alistair, alerted by the commotion, had burst in and carried me to safety, his arms badly burned in the process. This time I was prepared. I rolled from the bed, my heart pounding not with fear but with cold fury. I grabbed the fire extinguisher I had insisted be placed in the room upon my arrival and efficiently doused the flames just as the door burst open and the household began to swarm into the hallway. Cashin was at the front, a mask of feigned concern on his face that faltered for a split second when he saw me standing unharmed amidst the smoke, the empty extinguisher in my hand. He hadn't expected me to be anything but a helpless victim. He stepped close, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You got lucky this time. But Alara, if you dare set your sights on me as a husband, I swear I'll make you regret it. The only woman I will ever acknowledge as the lady of this house is Isolde." His blatant threat, so different from his previous lies, ignited a fury in me. The sharp crack of my palm against his cheek echoed through the smoke-hazed hall, shocking the assembled staff and family members into utter silence. I sneered, my voice clear and cutting. "Cashin Vance, if you have something to say, have the courage to say it aloud. What's the matter? Brave enough to commit arson, but afraid of a little confrontation? Perhaps you should worry more about your own actions than my marital prospects. You dared strike me?" he barked, stunned, his tone dripping with the arrogance of a man who had never been challenged. Suddenly a girl came flying down the stairs. Briar Vance, the youngest sibling. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You filthy country girl. How dare you raise your hand in the Vance house? My brother is the heir. Who do you think you are?" I turned my cold gaze to the other two brothers, Julian and Felix, who lingered nearby. Isolde, sweet-faced and wide-eyed, stepped forward, her voice a tremulous whisper. "Alara, can't we talk about this calmly? You've just arrived and you're already resorting to violence. If Father finds out—" I cut her off, my annoyance plain. "If Father finds out, he'll likely commend me for it." "Well." I raised an eyebrow at Felix, the youngest brother. He hesitated, then tried his placating act. "We're all family now. Perhaps we should strive for harmony. Alara, an apology might smooth things over." "An apology?" I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "So, it's acceptable for you to try and burn me alive, but I cannot defend myself? Cashin, did you truly believe I was a docile lamb sent to slaughter?" I swept my gaze over all of them. "Listen carefully. The next person who speaks out of turn I will choose as my husband. And I will make his life a perpetual hell. Go on. I dare you." The four of them froze, stunned into silence by my audacity. It was then that we heard hurried footsteps. Alistair Vance appeared, his shirt misbuttoned, a faint red mark on his wrist from where he'd doubtless shoved someone aside in his rush. "What happened here?" His voice was a controlled thunder. "Her door was locked from the outside. I had to find the key." His eyes went immediately to Cashin. "Guilty." Cashin quickly turned to his father, his voice shifting to a whine. "Father, she probably set the fire herself for attention. We came to help and she attacked me. She's unhinged. How could a woman like her be worthy of our name?" Alistair looked from his son's pleading face to my calm, soot-smudged one. Without a word, he lifted his hand and slapped Cashin with a force that snapped his head to the side. "You think it is your place to decide who is worthy of this family?" he said, his voice dangerously cold. "I know the character of my sons better than anyone. If an incident like this occurs again, all of you can get out." Cashin clutched his cheek, eyes wide with disbelief. I seized the moment. "Master Vance, it's all right," I said calmly. "Children who act out simply require firm guidance. From now on I will assume their mother's role and teach them some manners." My words landed like a bomb. Blatant provocation. But to Alistair, who had sworn to marry me, the remark was perfectly acceptable. He nodded gently. "Thank you, Alara. You've endured enough tonight. I'll have someone move you to another room where you can rest." The looks the four of them shot me could have flayed the skin from my bones. But I felt no fear. This was merely the opening move. The next morning, my secret ally, a kindly senior maid named Dahlia, came to see me. She had been a quiet comfort in my past life, before Isolde had her dismissed on false pretenses. This time I had secured her loyalty immediately with Alistair's help, doubling her salary and promising a position for her son. "Miss Alara," she whispered, wringing her hands. "Miss Isolde and the young masters, they were talking in the study. They're planning to find someone to abduct you." Her voice trembled, too afraid to finish. But I already knew. Just as in my past life, they sought to ruin my reputation to make me seem unworthy. The only difference was their timing. I gave a cold laugh, a sharp glint flashing in my eyes. "Whose idea was it?" "It was Miss Isolde," Dahlia whispered. "She said she'd record everything and send it to the press. That way you'd be tainted." The corner of my mouth curled into a smile. That confirmed it. The architect of my previous misery was the same. But in this life I was holding the pen and I would write the script myself. The confirmation from Dahlia settled in my stomach like a shard of ice. Isolde. It had always been Isolde. Memories I had suppressed, dismissing them as childish pranks, now surfaced with vicious clarity. In my first life I had been blind, seeing her as a sweet, if slightly spoiled, younger sister. She was the one who had secretly slit the pocket of my bathrobe, so that when I delivered documents to Cashin, the fabric gaped open, exposing me. She was the one who poured cheap, irritating perfume into my silk slippers, making my feet itch uncontrollably during a formal Vance gala. I had ended up kicking them off under the table and scratching my bare feet in full view of the elite society she desperately wanted to belong to. I had chalked it all up to immature jealousy. But the wedding, right before the ceremony, she had cut the seams of my wedding gown and clumsily stitched them back together with mismatched thread. I didn't notice until I was walking down the aisle, feeling the fabric strain and give way. And then one of her friends, strategically placed as a bridesmaid, accidentally stepped on the hem. The dress burst open on the altar in front of every important guest. The video, shot from Isolde's perfect angle, went viral within the hour. By the time I saw through her sweet facade, it was too late. That same night, as the three brothers tied me to the bed, she was there. She was more brutal than any of them, leaning in close to whisper, "Sissy Alara, the reason they hate you isn't because they love me more. It's because I keep telling them what a filthy whore you are. Enjoy it. The Vance family is my home, but for you it will always be hell." I had pleaded. I had explained. I had begged them to see the truth. But to them, Isolde was their pure, innocent sister and I was the gold-digging usurper. Now hearing that she had concocted another plan, kidnapping, defilement, public ruin, a cold, hard resolve solidified within me. Their so-called loyalty to her was a farce, built on her manipulations and their own vile natures. This time I would show no mercy. The next day Isolde came to find me, her face a perfect mask of contrite sweetness. "Alara, the boys were completely out of line last night. I'm so sorry on their behalf. To make it up to you, how about we go out? That new ultra lounge, Onyx, just opened. Just us girls. I'll make the boys come too so they can apologize properly." I returned her smile, making mine even brighter, even sweeter. Of course, Isolde. How could I refuse such a generous offer from my soon-to-be sister? I played the part of the naive country girl, disarmed by her attention. I let her lead me to the private luxury van she had arranged. Inside, she pressed a chilled can of sparkling peach tea into my hand. "Here, you must be thirsty." I knew it was drugged the moment the sweet, syrupy liquid touched my lips. I knew that the moment we arrived at Onyx I would lose consciousness. Thugs, already hired and waiting, would be there to humiliate me. Then the three brothers would conveniently arrive to rescue me, capturing the whole sordid scene on camera to paint me as a wanton, unstable mess, utterly unfit for the Vance name. Even though I knew the entire script, I drank it in front of her, maintaining my placid smile until my eyelids began to droop. My body reacted quickly, slumping against the plush seat. "Alara, are you okay?" Isolde asked with feigned concern, her voice dripping with false worry as she helped me into a private VIP room at the club. From beneath my heavy lids, I saw two hulking men in black loitering outside the door. Isolde leaned in, her sweet mask melting away into something twisted and vicious. Her whisper meant only for my drugged ears. Don't kill her. Just get enough footage. Make sure the camera gets her face clearly. She paused, then added with chilling casualness, "Oh, and you guys do have STDs, right? As long as it's not anything too serious, I'm not paying extra otherwise." Then she turned her venom directly to me, her breath hot against my ear. "Elara Thorne, you think you can marry into the Vance family? You think you can be the lady of the house? I've lived with the Vances since I was 7. Who the hell are you?" Right before the darkness fully claimed me, an image of Alistair's sharp, rugged face flashed in my mind. This time he would see. He would see the monstrous creature he had been raising. The moment she had given me the tea, I had already palmed my phone and, with a few deft movements under the pretense of adjusting my dress, called Alistair and left the line open. Every vile word she uttered, about filming, about diseases, her cold demands, was transmitted directly to his phone. As the two thugs entered the room and began to tear at my shirt, a primal fear, even though I had expected it, shot through me. But it was swiftly eclipsed by the sound of the door exploding inward. Alistair Vance stood there, a look of apocalyptic fury on his face. In his hand was not a baseball bat, but a heavy, polished mahogany cane from his study. His eyes, usually so composed, were blazing red behind his glasses. Without a single word, he moved with a speed and ferocity that belied his age. The cane whistled through the air and connected with the first thug's knee with a sickening crack. The man screamed, collapsing. The second thug tried to bolt, but Alistair's leg shot out, sweeping the man's feet from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. "If you so much as lay another finger on her," Alistair growled, his voice a low, terrifying tremor, "I will ensure you pray for death." The refined, restrained Master Vance was gone. In his place was the fierce, ruthless man who had built an empire from nothing. He stripped off his tailored blazer, laying it over me like a blanket, and gathered me into his arms. Isolde chose that moment to return from the restroom, having heard the commotion. Hands on her hips, she started to shout, "Useless trash. Can't even handle one simple." Her words died in her throat as she saw Alistair holding me, his gaze locking onto her. "Father? What are you doing here?" she stammered, her eyes darting to me, desperately trying to see if my ruin was complete. All she saw was his icy, disappointed glare. "On your knees. In the ancestral hall. Until sunrise," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He didn't even wait for a response, carrying me out of that den of vipers. I woke up in a private hospital room, the sterile white light harsh against my eyes. Alistair was sitting in a chair beside the bed, meticulously peeling an apple. The moment he saw my eyes open, he slammed the fruit and the paring knife onto the bedside table. "Do you have no regard for your own life?" he snapped, his voice rough with a fear he couldn't conceal. "What if I had been a minute later? What if those animals had? Why didn't you tell me Isolde was tormenting you?" His voice broke hoarse as if he'd been shouting or crying. I felt a genuine pang of guilt for worrying him. I tugged gently at his sleeve, allowing a soft vulnerability into my voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me." My words struck him like a physical blow. He turned his face away, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. It took him a long moment to find his voice, which came out as a rasp. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. It won't happen again, Elara. Please trust me." "I do," I whispered, and I meant it. In my past life he had been my only flicker of light. Suddenly the hospital room door burst open. The three Vance brothers barged in. Felix still had his gaming headphones around his neck. Julian's eyes flickered to the 4 in my hand, but what came out of his mouth was a plea for their precious Isolde. "Father," Cashin began, his tone wheedling. "Isolde. She's never endured hardship. The ancestral hall is cold and stone. How can she kneel there all night? She'll fall ill." "Did she suffer?" Alistair interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. The 3 words hung in the air, sucking the warmth from the room. Then Alistair laughed, a short, bitter sound. His eyes were red with a fury I had never seen. "So all that education, all those privileges, what were they for? When Isolde plotted to have Alara kidnapped and violated, did she stop to consider whether Alara would suffer? Father, Isolde was just... Julian tried to defend her, but one searing glance from Alistair shut him up. Felix, ever the impulsive fool, stepped forward and slammed his hand on the windowsill. So what if she did something wrong? He's still family. Are you saying someone like her should kneel all night for someone like Alara? This boy who had once pretended to be my confidant, now showed his true vile face. Alistair stood up, his expression darkening. He moved with startling speed, his foot connecting with the back of Felix's knee, forcing him to the ground with a grunt of pain. You think the Vance Empire exists so you can abuse the innocent? He then turned to me, his expression softening into something that looked like a request for my approval. Alara, he said, his voice firm. I think it's time we made our engagement public. He pulled a thick document from his briefcase. Let's be perfectly clear, he announced, his voice echoing in the sterile room. I have decided to transfer the majority of my personal shares in the Vance conglomerate into Alara's name, effective immediately. Furthermore, she will have the final say in choosing the future heir of this family. This is not a discussion. It is done. The papers are signed. The room exploded. You've lost your mind. Julian was the first to explode, his calm facade shattering. The Vance legacy should pass to your sons. Why give it to an outsider? Cashin's face went pitch black as if he'd been struck by lightning. At most, I'd agree to some shares for Isolde. But Alara? Not a chance. Felix, still on the floor, was the most dramatic, his voice cracking. We're your real sons. Isolde is your daughter. You raised her for over a decade. But Alara? She's some nobody from nowhere. What can she possibly offer the Vance dynasty? Alistair towered over them all, his gaze glacial. Your mother held my hand on her deathbed and begged me to raise you to be men of character. If she saw you now, she would climb out of her grave to slap the hell out of each one of you. His eyes locked onto Cashin. You set fire to Alara's room. Did it ever occur to you she could have died? I am the head of this family. I decide its future. And all of you should be ashamed. In 20 years, none of you have proven yourself capable of carrying this burden. He turned his withering gaze on each of them. Cashin, you terrorized your tutors with razor blades. Julian, you cornered a classmate and threatened her with acid. It cost me 8 million to silence that. Felix, 300 million gambled away in Macau last year, a debt I paid. Tell me, which one of you is fit to lead? The brothers' faces paled, their arrogance deflating under the weight of their exposed sins. They now realized their father's decision was unshakable. Seeing their defeat, Alistair continued calmly. The wedding will be held in 1 month. Alara is marrying. Before he could finish, Cashin suddenly dropped to his knees. I know I was wrong, he declared, his voice dripping with false repentance. I'm willing to marry Alara. It was all a mistake, a moment of immaturity. I was misled by Isolde. Alara, I promise from now on, I will treat you with nothing but sincerity. Please marry me. The other two caught on instantly. Whoever married me would control the shares, would be the heir. It didn't matter if the marriage lasted. Power was the immediate goal. Julian shoved Cashin aside and knelt on one knee. Alara, I've admired you from the beginning. I was simply blinded by Isolde's lies. Then came Felix, the most absurd of all. He actually pulled a velvet ring box from his pocket, revealing a garishly large diamond ring. This was our grandmother's. Destined for her future granddaughter-in-law. Look at the cut, it's as flawless as you are. We can fly to the Seychelles tomorrow for photos. I raised an eyebrow. Where did you even get that? A bargain bin. The three of them were shouting over each other, a grotesque auction for my hand and the power it now represented. The entire Vance Empire was to be mine. What could they possibly offer me that I couldn't get for myself? They hadn't thought to offer anything when they held me down and called me a whore. I finally cut through their pathetic clamor. All right. You want to marry me? Then here are my terms. Whichever one of you can make Isolde kneel and offer me a sincere, abject apology, I will marry. The brothers froze. Forcing their beloved Isolde to kneel and beg? It was unthinkable. But the inheritance was a siren's call. Before they could process the demand, Alistair suddenly bent down, scooped me up into his arms and strode toward the door. I let out a small yelp, instinctively wrapping my arms around his neck. What was he doing? He always seemed so serious, but the way he carried me made my heart flutter unexpectedly. Cashin frowned and moved to block him. "Father, what are you doing?" Alistair sidestepped him effortlessly. "I'm going to make Isolde apologize," he snapped, his tone harsh, but the arm around my waist was impossibly gentle. I buried my face in his chest, secretly smiling. He was jealous. He had said I could choose, but the sight of his sons fighting over me like dogs over a bone had shattered his patience. As he carried me to the family's black sedan, setting me gently in the back, I couldn't hold back my laughter. The brothers scrambled into their own car, following close behind, shouting promises out the window. "Alara, wait. We'll make her apologize. Just pick me. I'll make her smash her head on the floor for you." Alistair's face darkened like a thundercloud, and he rolled up the soundproof partition with a sharp snap, leaving us in a bubble of quiet tension. The car ride to the Vance estate was charged with a silent, potent energy. Alistair's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the leather upholstery. Halfway there he suddenly looked down at me, a rare vulnerability in his gray eyes. "If they actually managed to get Isolde to kneel," he asked, his voice low, "would you truly marry one of them?" I grinned, enjoying his flustered tone. "Why not? Didn't you say the choice was mine to make?" His expression darkened instantly. "No. That is not happening." Then he pulled me into his chest, holding me there firmly, not giving me a chance to wiggle away. "Careful, you'll wrinkle your suit," I teased, my laughter muffled against his shirt. Inside I was triumphant. On the surface I nodded sweetly. "All right then, Master Vance. Who do you think I should marry?" Just as he was about to speak, the brothers' sports car screeched up beside us at a red light. Felix clung to the window, shouting, "Sissy Alara, wait for us. We're going to make Isolde apologize right now." Julian shot him a glare. "What do you mean we?" "Speak for yourself." Cashin leaned out, making a grotesque heart gesture with his hands. "Alara Thorne, just say the word and I'll make Isolde smash her head bloody on the stone floor for you." Alistair's face turned thunderous. He hit a button and the tinted partition slid up completely, sealing us in a blissful, quiet cocoon. I trembled in his arms, laughing uncontrollably at the sheer absurdity of it all. At the ancestral hall, Isolde had already been kneeling for hours. Her knees were raw and bleeding, her designer dress torn, her perfectly styled bangs soaked with sweat and plastered to her forehead. When she saw us enter, followed by her 3 champions, her eyes lit up with a desperate hope. She immediately crawled toward Cashin, her voice a pitiful whimper. "Cashin, you're finally here. My knees, they're agony. Please help me. Talk to father for me." Cashin didn't even hesitate. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, his own hand swung out, slapping her across the face with such force that she sprawled sideways onto the cold stone floor, clutching her cheek in utter disbelief. "Apologize to her," Cashin said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Isolde whimpered, her eyes swimming with tears of shock and betrayal. "Cashin, you hit me? Kneel. No. And give her 3 loud kowtows," he commanded coldly. "Say, Sister Alara, I was wrong." Isolde's eyes darted to Julian and Felix, seeking salvation, only to see Julian already unbuckling his expensive leather belt. "Didn't you hear him? Apologize. And make sure you say it was Brother Julian who made you do it." Felix squatted down, gripped her chin with a cruel smile, and said in that sweet but sinister tone he'd mastered, "Aren't you great at playing the poor little princess? Go on, put on a show for Sister Alara. Make it good and I'll still spoil you. Oh, and remember to say it was Brother Felix who told you to apologize." It was a surreal, horrifying spectacle. The 3 men who had once worshipped her were now engaged in a vicious competition to be the one to break her first. As Julian raised his belt menacingly, Isolde finally panicked. She looked past them to Alistair, her last resort. "Father. Help me. They've gone mad. They're insane," she cried, her voice cracking with real terror. But Alistair only stared at her, his expression icy and remote. "Apologize to Alara," he said, his voice flat and final, "or keep kneeling for the rest of the month." That broke her. With her last shield gone, with the brothers who had pampered her endlessly now turned into her tormentors, Isolde's defiance crumbled into pure abject fear. Trembling violently, she crawled on her bloodied knees to my feet. She knocked her forehead against the cold stone floor 3 times, the sound echoing in the silent hall. "Sister Alara. I was wrong. Please, please forgive me. The moment the third kowtow was completed, the three brothers lunged forward like rabid dogs fighting over a single scrap of meat. I told you to apologize. Cashin shouted. Alara, you heard her. It was because of me. Liar. It was my belt that scared her into it. Julian yelled, brandishing the leather strap. Look. Her drool is on my fingers. I grabbed her. Felix declared, holding up his hand as if it were a trophy. At that point I truly wanted to ask them if it was all the same damn nonsense. But I held my tongue, unsure if Alistair would appreciate the dark humor. He didn't always understand the chaotic absurdity of the young. Isolde was being yanked between them, finally realizing the truth. All three brothers wanted to marry me, and whichever one got her to apologize first won the prize. The humiliation was absolute. Why? She screamed inside, her face a mask of furious despair. Why should I, the treasured princess of the Vance family, lose to some backwater peasant like Alara Thorne? She finally shoved them all away and glared up at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it could have curdled milk. You're loving this, aren't you? She spat, her voice shaking with rage. Watching them fight over you like animals. Is this what makes you happy? Whoever makes me apologize, that's who you'll marry. Then fine. I only apologized because of father. If you've got any guts, marry him instead. Then she let out a manic, broken laugh, her sanity clearly fraying at the edges. You're all clowns. Three pathetic simps and one gold-digging whore who wants to marry a tired old man. Her words were the final nail in her coffin. 20 years of carefully cultivated emotional bonds shattered in an instant. The brothers didn't lose control because of the insult to themselves, but because she had threatened their only remaining path to power. Shut your filthy mouth. Cashin roared. You called my future wife a whore? Julian snarled. You're the real trash here. The three of them descended on her, not with fists, but with a verbal and physical manhandling that was brutal in its contempt. They surrounded her, their voices a cacophony of threats and insults, their earlier devotion replaced by pure, unadulterated fury. I leaned into Alistair's arms and gave a cold, satisfied smirk. This was their beloved, pure white moonlight. And now, for the sake of profit, they were ready to tear her apart. Alistair gently patted the back of my hand. Ilara, he murmured softly, his voice barely audible over the din, do you truly wish to marry an old man like me? There was a raw vulnerability in his question, the insecurity of our age gap laid bare. I looked up at him, my smile genuine this time. I drew out my words. Well, what else would I want? I hooked my fingers around his silk tie, gently tugging him closer. Everyone gets old. When I'm old, I won't have the confidence to look as young as you do. Right now there's a 20-year gap between us. You're twice my age. But in 10 years it'll only be 1.6 times. In 20-30 years that gap will keep shrinking. And when our hair turns white, who will even notice the difference? Alistair let out a low, heartfelt chuckle, his eyes softening as he was visibly moved by my words. I had given him the reassurance he needed. My mind was made up. I clapped my hands sharply, cutting through the brothers' squabbling. Everyone quiet down. I have an announcement. The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Since Isolde was so eager to announce it for me, I said, my voice clear and ringing, I'll make it official. The man I have chosen to marry is Alistair Vance. I turned to the three stunned brothers and added with a sweet, malicious smile. All right, you three. You may now line up to call me mother. The three Vance brothers froze for a second, then burst into derisive laughter. Julian sneered. Alara, come on. Who's going to believe that? Seriously, stop joking, Felix added quickly. Just pick one of us already. Cashin let out a mocking snort. Nice move. Playing hard to get. Too bad it doesn't work on us. As I looked at their smug, entitled faces, my heart filled with cold amusement. They still thought this was a game I was playing for their benefit. If they wouldn't believe words, I would give them action they couldn't ignore. I rose up on my toes, wrapped both arms around Alistair's neck and kissed him. His eyes widened in shock. That kiss carried the weight of my past life resentment, the fierce resolve of my present, and the trust one was placing in him now. Alistair's body tensed for a moment in surprise, then he slowly closed his eyes, his arms encircling me, pulling me tight against him as he kissed me back with a passion that stole my breath. The ancestral hall fell into a silence so complete you could hear the dust settling. That kiss was steady, sure, and utterly definitive. A public declaration to everyone. I had chosen him. Alistair Vance. Cassian, Julian, Felix, even Isolde. Every single one of them stood frozen, their eyes wide with utter, dumbfounded disbelief. I pulled back slightly, looking up at Alistair, my eyes full of anticipation. Kiss me again, I thought. Forget age, forget status. Right now, I am just a woman choosing the man she wants. Alistair looked down at me, his gaze so tender it felt like a physical warmth. He stroked my hair, his voice filled with a rare, profound reverence. Alara, I will marry you with the grandest wedding this family has ever seen. I will ensure everyone in the world knows that you are the woman Alistair Vance loves most. Then he lowered his head and kissed me again. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. It was a kiss of pure, unwavering commitment. And right in the middle of that breathtaking, perfect moment, Cassian suddenly shouted, "Enough!" His voice cut through the air like a shard of glass. He was staring at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. "Alara," he said, his voice trembling with a strange mix of fear and accusation. Are you reborn or something?" Both Alistair and I froze, turning to look at him. Julian and Felix also caught on, their eyes snapping toward their brother in alarm. Cassian hadn't finished his sentence, but we all understood his meaning. The atmosphere in the ancestral hall turned thick and eerie, charged with an unspoken, terrible knowledge. Julian and Felix exchanged a look, their faces draining of color. Isolde, still on the floor, trembled, her eyes filled with a new kind of terror. So, they had all been reborn. After my death in the previous life, the entire Vance family had spiraled into a hell of their own making. The three brothers, turned against each other by their obsession with Isolde and their hunger for power, had become bitter rivals, engaging in backstabbing and corporate sabotage. Their mistrust festered until they began to plot against Alistair himself. In the end, Alistair died under mysterious circumstances, and the brothers, in their ensuing war for control, destroyed each other and the empire their father had built. None of them had met a peaceful end. Alistair now looked at his sons, a deep, profound sorrow and disappointment etched into every line of his face. "You all remember," he said quietly, a statement, not a question. Cassian gave a bitter, broken laugh. "Yeah, we remember. Don't you, father? You were reborn too, weren't you? If you weren't, how could you suddenly be so protective of Alara?" He sneered, his fear morphing back into arrogance. "So, Alara, you think marrying my father means you can steal the Vance legacy? Keep dreaming. The Vance empire stays with Vance blood. It doesn't matter which of us brothers it goes to, the name stays Vance." The three Vance brothers exchanged a glance. A flicker of unified, cruel understanding passed between them. Slowly they stepped forward, forming a loose semicircle around Alistair and me, their earlier rivalry forgotten in the face of a common enemy. Their expressions twisted into grimaces of unified hatred. Behind them Isolde shrieked, her voice shrill with manic glee. "Kill them. If they're gone, the Vance family is still ours. It will be mine." I looked at the four people who had once destroyed me. There was no fear in my heart now, only a cold, purifying disgust and a burning certainty. Alistair pushed me behind him, his body a shield. His eyes turned to ice as he stared down his own sons. "You truly wish to walk this path again?" His voice was low and deadly. "You believe this life will be a repeat of the last, where you could act with impunity? Let me be clear, so long as I draw breath, I will not allow you to lay a single finger on Alara." Cassian smirked, a mask of contempt over his fear. "Save your breath, old man. You died by our hands once before. This time you and that bitch can die together." The sheer, stupid audacity of it nearly made me laugh aloud. Did they truly believe that Alistair Vance, the man who had built a financial empire from nothing, was standing here in his own ancestral hall completely unprepared? "Alistair Vance, you old fool. Do you seriously think you—" Cassian didn't get to finish his threat. The sound of dozens of synchronized footsteps echoed from the hallways. In the next second, more than 20 black-clad security personnel flooded the ancestral hall, sealing every exit with silent, efficient precision. They were followed by the household staff. Mrs. Croft, the head cook, arrived holding a tray of freshly sliced fruit, looking around with bemused curiosity. "What's all this then?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "Kinda dramatic. Are we filming a gangster picture? Need some watermelon for the scene." Behind the bodyguards came 7 or 8 other staff members. Dahlia winked at me as she stepped forward, brandishing a feather duster like a weapon, aiming it squarely at Isolde. "Let's see if this silk-clad brat can handle a good dusting." Cashin swallowed hard, clearly rattled, but he puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his authority. "Do you know who I am? I am the future head of the Vance family. When I take control, I'll triple everyone's salary." The security team remained stoic and silent. The staff, however, burst into incredulous giggles. Mrs. Croft rolled her eyes. "Oh, give it a rest, lad. Ever since you threw my tabby cat in the koi pond last month, I've been itching to box your ears." I overheard Dahlia chatting with the head gardener. "Unbelievable. Do they really think running this family is a game?" The gardener nodded. "My grandson has more sense than these 3 fools put together." The brothers' faces turned from ghostly white to flushed red with utter humiliation. Furious, stripped of all pretense and power, Cashin screamed, "Fine. Screw it. Let's go. Kill them." He charged forward, only to be tackled to the ground by 2 bodyguards before he could take 3 steps. His knees slammed into the stone floor and he howled in pain. Julian and Felix were smarter. They never moved. Both dropped to their knees immediately, their bravado evaporating, and began to bawl. "Father, we were wrong. We don't want to die. Please just let us live. We won't fight over the inheritance anymore, we swear. Just give us enough to live on, we won't ask for anything else." Then came the most absurd moment of all. Isolde, seeing the complete shift in power, sauntered up to Alistair, swaying her hips, trying to summon a shred of her former charm. "Daddy," she purred, her voice sickly sweet, "I can marry you too. I'm younger than Alara. I'm prettier. I'm the one who truly suits you best." She actually reached out to touch his face. Alistair recoiled as if touched by something vile, slapping her hand away. His voice was cold, hard steel. "I have already had my people gather all the evidence of your crimes. Arson, conspiracy to kidnap, intentional infliction of harm." He pulled a thick stack of documents from his inside pocket and flung them to the ground at their feet. "This is more than enough to see you all imprisoned for a very, very long time." He took a final sweeping look at the 4 of them, his sons and the daughter he raised, now kneeling, crying, or seething on the floor of the hall built to honor their ancestors. "From this day forward," Alistair Vance declared, his voice echoing with finality, "you are no longer members of this family. The doors of this house are forever closed to you. Take them away." The security team moved forward immediately, hauling all 4 of them to their feet. They didn't go quietly. Isolde screamed as she was dragged back. "Father, I'm the daughter you raised for 12 years. You can't do this to me." Alistair didn't flinch. He watched them being taken away, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a bottomless well of disappointment and disgust. After all he had given them, all he had tried to teach them, they remained nothing but ungrateful wolves. But when he turned to look at me, all that coldness instantly melted away, replaced by a warmth and relief that made my breath catch. "Ilara," he said gently, pulling me close. "No one will ever hurt you again." In that moment, standing amidst the ruins of his former family, I felt an indescribable rush of peace. The vengeance was complete. The trash had finally been taken out. A week later, Alistair Vance and I were married. He had not been exaggerating about the grandeur. The wedding was a spectacle the city would talk about for decades. It was held on the sprawling grounds of the Vance estate, transformed into a wonderland of white orchids and cascading silver lights. Every influential name in business, politics, and society was in attendance, their curiosity about the mysterious woman who had captured Alistair Vance's heart palpable. I wore a gown of antique ivory lace, fitted and elegant, a world away from the monstrous confection Isolde had sabotaged in my previous life. As I walked down the aisle on the arm of a distant but kindly uncle from the Thorn side, I didn't look at the guests. My eyes were fixed on Alistair, waiting for me at the end of the flower-strewn path. He stood tall and imposing in a tailored morning suit, his gray eyes clear and intent solely on me. In them I saw not just desire but a profound, unwavering commitment. The memory of my first wedding, the humiliation, the fear, the betrayal, faded into nothingness, replaced by this moment of breathtaking certainty. The ceremony was traditional, the vows exchanged in strong, clear voices. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Alistair didn't wait for permission. He cupped my face in his hands and kissed me, a kiss that was both tender and fiercely possessive, a public seal on our private oath. And then Alistair Vance, the formidable, serious patriarch, truly cut loose. At the reception, as the band transitioned into a modern, upbeat melody, he took my hand and led me to the center of the dance floor. The guests fell silent, expecting a stately waltz. Instead, the opening beats of a popular, rhythmically complex K-pop song filled the air. Alistair had hired the choreographers. He had practiced for weeks in secret. And he performed. With a shocking amount of tension, flair, and sheer athleticism, my 42-year-old husband executed the dance moves with a precision and power that left the audience first stunned, then erupting into cheers and applause. I laughed, joining him for the simpler parts, my heart swelling with a joy so intense it felt like a physical ache. I genuinely worried a few times during some of the deep, powerful backbends that he might throw out his back, but he finished flawlessly, barely winded, pulling me into a dip at the end. The message was clear. Alistair Vance was not a tired old man. He was vibrant, powerful, and utterly devoted to his new wife. The party lasted long into the night. We were showered with well wishes, though I noted the absence of a few certain names. The story of the Vance heirs' disinheritance and arrest had been a carefully managed leak in the financial press, enough to explain their absence without revealing the sordid details. We were surrounded by warmth and light, the shadows of the past firmly locked away. Later, in the quiet of our master suite, a new, opulent space Alistair had designed for us, far from the room of the fire, he stood behind me, gently removing the delicate pins from my hair. "Was it everything you hoped for?" he asked, his voice a soft rumble near my ear. I turned in his arms, looking up at him. "It was perfect," I whispered and meant it. "You were perfect." The first few months of our marriage were a time of quiet discovery and deepening intimacy. We settled into a comfortable rhythm. Alistair, while still the busy CO, delegated more than he ever had, ensuring his evenings and weekends were ours. We traveled to places I had only ever read about, walking the cobbled streets of Lisbon, sailing the turquoise waters of the Aegean, watching the northern lights dance over the Icelandic tundra. He was a fascinating travel companion, knowledgeable and observant, but also capable of delightful silliness, like insisting we get matching ridiculous tourist hats. I began to involve myself in the Vance Foundation, its charitable arm. With Alistair's full support, I initiated programs for underprivileged artists and scholarships for young women pursuing business degrees. I found a purpose beyond survival and vengeance. I was building a legacy I could be proud of. And then, 3 months after the wedding, I realized my cycle was late. A nervous, thrilling suspicion took root. I said nothing to Alistair, not wanting to get his hopes up or mine, in case I was wrong. I quietly purchased a test, and one morning while he was in his morning meeting via video call in his study, I took it. The 2 pink lines appeared instantly, bold and undeniable. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. I clutched the edge of the vanity, staring at my reflection. A woman glowing with happiness, a world away from the broken creature who had died in this very house. A new life was growing within me. Our life. I practically floated out of the bathroom, the test stick still in my hand. Alistair was just finishing his call. He turned in his chair, a smile already on his face as I entered. His smile faltered as he saw my expression, a mix of tears and radiant joy. "Alara, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned, rising from his chair. I couldn't speak. I simply held out the plastic stick. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion for a second as he looked down at it. Then understanding dawned. His head snapped up, his gray eyes wide, searching mine for confirmation. I nodded, the tears finally spilling over. A look of utter awe transformed his face. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling me into a crushing yet careful embrace. He didn't speak for a long moment, just held me, his heart hammering against my chest. Then he slowly sank to his knees right there on the study rug, and pressed his ear against my still flat stomach. He stayed like that for a full 10 minutes, perfectly still, his eyes closed in concentration. His expression was so serious, so reverent, It was as if he were listening for divine whispers from our tiny poppy-seed-sized child. I finally laughed, the sound watery with happy tears. I gently smacked his shoulder. Alistair, it's only been a few weeks. There's nothing to hear yet. His ears turned a charming shade of red. Without a word, he stood, swept me up into his arms with exquisite gentleness, and carried me to the large sofa, tucking a blanket around me as if I were made of the most fragile glass. "What do you want to eat?" he asked, his voice hushed with wonder. "I've already asked Mrs. Croft to prepare ginger tea and those spicy noodles you craved last week. I'll send someone to get them immediately." Oh, and wait. He was already reaching for his phone, doubtless to summon a team of doctors, nutritionists, and probably a feng shui expert for the nursery. I pressed my hand over his mouth, laughing. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice full of affection. "This is not your first time becoming a father. Can you please try to be calm? You're supposed to be the seasoned expert here." He leaned down, removing my hand and replacing it with a kiss on my forehead. "That is exactly why," he murmured against my skin, "I want to give all the tenderness I have left in this life to you and our baby. You both deserve every ounce of it." In that moment, any lingering shred of fear or memory of my past life vanished. My world had narrowed to this room, to this man, to the incredible future growing inside me. My life felt utterly, completely perfect. The news of the pregnancy spread through the household, which reacted with genuine joy. Dahlia became my self-appointed guardian, shooing me away from anything heavier than a book. Mrs. Croft began a mission to fatten me up with delicious, nutritious meals. As for the four mutts who had once made my life a living hell, they were having a very different experience. Through Dahlia, whose cousin worked as a guard at the state penitentiary, I received regular, albeit indirect, updates. They were a source of dark, satisfying amusement. Cashin, with his entitled arrogance, had tried to assert dominance in the prison workshop. He'd had his meal, steamed buns, snatched right out of his hands by a larger inmate and had been forced to go hungry. Julian, the schemer, had tried to fake illness to get sent to the infirmary by eating a small amount of laundry detergent. The resulting stomach pump and subsequent solitary confinement for causing a disturbance had been decidedly unpleasant. Felix, the gambler, had tried to start a little side hustle, doing other inmates' laundry in exchange for candy bars and cigarettes. He'd been caught by the guards and punished by being forced to scrub the communal toilets with a toothbrush for 3 days straight. Isolde's experience was the most poetic. She had been placed in a cell with a woman who was the undisputed top dog of her block. This woman, according to Dahlia's cousin, took an instant disliking to Isolde's entitled whining and her constant claims of being the true daughter of the Vance family. He beat her daily. Yet, in a stunning display of her delusion, Isolde still strutted around the exercise yard, telling anyone who would listen about her wealthy family and her imminent release. Dahlia could barely keep a straight face as she relayed this while peeling apples for me. "People who cling too hard to their delusions always go insane in the end," she muttered, a smirk playing on her lips. One afternoon, I was resting in the sunlit conservatory, a book open on my lap, my hand resting on the gentle new swell of my stomach. Alistair came out of his study, a sheaf of papers in his hand. He stopped in the doorway watching me. The sunlight poured in from the window behind him, casting him in a golden halo. As I watched him standing there, his gaze soft and full of love, I realized something with crystalline clarity. All the blood and tears I had suffered in my past life, every wound, every scar, had all been dissolved, healed, and replaced by this single radiant light named Alistair Vance. He was my peace. He was my future. And our child was the beautiful, undeniable proof that the cycle of hatred was broken, and a new, hopeful story had begun. The golden piece of my pregnancy was a balm, but it did not make me naive. The world, especially the world of the Vances, did not stop turning. While I nurtured new life within me, the disgraced former heirs were navigating the brutal reality of their new existence. Alistair, ever the pragmatist, had not left their fate entirely to the prison system. His lawyers ensured their sentences were long and their comforts few, but he also made certain they were kept separate, unable to form alliances or continue their scheming together. They were alone, each with their own bitterness and regret. The business world, initially rattled by the sudden disinheritance and scandal, had stabilized under Alistair's firm hand. My involvement in the foundation and my visible presence by his side at carefully chosen public events had quelled the rumors, painting a picture of a stable, forward-looking dynasty. The narrative was one of renewal, not ruin. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as I was reviewing foundation proposals, Dahlia entered the study with a peculiar look on her face. "Miss Alara, I mean Mrs. Vance," she corrected herself with a smile. "There's a visitor for you. A Mr. Sterling. He says he's an old friend of the Thorne family." He was insistent. The name meant nothing to me. I was about to decline, prioritizing my rest, but a faint, nagging curiosity tugged at me. My family was small and distant. We had few old friends who would seek me out here. "Show him into the blue drawing room, Dahlia. I'll be down in a moment." I found a man in his late 50s standing by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. He was well-dressed but in a slightly outdated style, his hair silvered at the temples. He turned as I entered, and his eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, swept over me with an assessing look that felt too familiar for a stranger. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice smooth. "Thank you for seeing me. My name is Silas Sterling. I was a business associate of your father's many years ago." "My father passed away when I was young," I said politely, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm afraid I don't recall his associates. How can I help you, Mr. Sterling?" He took a seat, steepling his fingers. "I was sorry to hear of his passing. He was a good man. A bit idealistic perhaps, but good." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "I've been abroad for many years. I only recently returned and heard the remarkable news about you. Marrying Alistair Vance. Quite a leap from the Thorne family's modest beginnings." His tone was pleasant, but there was an undertone I didn't like. A hint of condescension, of implication. I kept my expression neutral. "Fate works in mysterious ways." "Indeed," he murmured. His eyes dropped to the slight swell of my stomach, and a strange, almost hungry look flickered across his face before it was gone. "And congratulations are in order, I see. Securing the Vance lineage. How fortunate." The way he said "fortunate" made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. This was no social call. "Mr. Sterling, while I appreciate your well wishes, my schedule is rather full. Was there a specific purpose to your visit?" He leaned forward slightly. "I knew your uncle as well. Elias Thorne. A different sort of man than your father. Ambitious." The mention of my uncle's name was like a splash of cold water. In my dying moments, Alistair had whispered, "The Vance trap was sprung by your uncle." I had buried that knowledge, focused on building my new life, assuming my uncle's machinations had died with my first life. Now this stranger was dragging his ghost into my sunlit drawing room. "My uncle and I were not close," I said, my voice cooler. "A pity," Sterling said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "He had such plans for you. He believed the Thorne blood deserved more than obscurity. He would be intrigued to see how things have turned out. Though I suspect he might have envisioned a different Vance brother for you." The air left the room. He knew. He knew about the prophecy, the original plan. He knew about my uncle's ambitions. This man was not here to offer congratulations. He was here to feel me out, to see what I knew, to see if I was a player in a game I thought was over. I rose to my feet, my poise a shield. "The past holds no interest for me, Mr. Sterling. My future is with my husband and my child. If you have business, I suggest you take it to the Vance corporate offices. Dahlia will see you out." His smile remained, but it tightened at the edges. He stood and gave a slight old-fashioned bow. "Of course. Forgive an old man's nostalgia. I wish you and your family the very best." The pause before family was deliberate, ominous. After he left, I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the rain suddenly sounding more like a warning than a comfort. I had been foolish. I had assumed that cutting off the snake's head, Cassian Julian Felix Isolde, was enough. But my uncle had been the original puppeteer. Who was to say he didn't have other puppets? Silas Sterling was one. How many others were there? I didn't tell Alistair immediately. He was burdened enough with the business and his fervent protectiveness over my pregnancy. I didn't want to add a vague, paranoid worry. Instead, I began my own quiet investigation. I reached out to the few remaining Thornes I knew, elderly aunts and cousins, asking careful questions about my father and uncle, about their business, about a man named Silas Sterling. The answers were slow in coming and frustratingly vague. My father had been a dreamer, interested in archaeology and history, not business. My uncle Elias had taken over the family's modest import-export firm and had, by all accounts, run it into the ground with risky ventures and eccentric partners. Silas Sterling's name came up once, described as a shadowy investor, who had a falling out with Elias before disappearing overseas. It was nothing concrete, but it was enough to confirm that Sterling was not a benign figure. He was a link to a past that was trying to reassert itself. My quiet anxiety must have been palpable because a few days later, Alistair found me staring blankly at a book in the library. He knelt before my chair, taking my hands in his. "Elara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Something is troubling you. I can feel it. Is it the baby? Are you unwell?" I looked into his concerned eyes and knew I couldn't keep this from him. We were partners. I had a visitor the other day. A man named Silas Sterling. He said he was an associate of my father and my uncle. Alistair's expression immediately grew guarded. "Sterling? What did he want?" "He was probing," I said. "He mentioned my uncle's ambitions. He implied that my marriage to you was a deviation from some plan. He knew things, Alistair." To my surprise, Alistair didn't look shocked. He sighed, a weary sound that spoke of old burdens. "I should have told you," he said, rising to sit in the chair opposite me. "My investigation into your uncle's role didn't end with your first death. When I woke up back in time, one of my first priorities was to dismantle any network he might have left behind. Elias Thorne died penniless and alone in a foreign country 6 months before my visit to you. I believed the threat had died with him. Silas Sterling was his most capable lieutenant. I thought he had vanished for good. My blood ran cold. So he is a threat." "He is a remnant," Alistair corrected, his voice hardening. "A ghost from a war he lost before it even began. His coming here was a test. He wanted to see if you were aware of the old plots, if you were a potential ally or an enemy." "What does he want?" I asked. "The same thing your uncle wanted," Alistair said. "Control of the Vance Empire. The prophecy was real, Elara, but it was also vague. It spoke of a Thorne daughter bringing peace. Your uncle interpreted that as his bloodline taking control through marriage. He believed that by manipulating one of my sons into marrying you, he could then manipulate that son and through him the entire Vance fortune. When you chose me instead, you shattered his entire scheme. Sterling is likely scrambling, trying to find a new angle." The pieces clicked into place. The brothers' initial hostility, their obsession with Isolde. Had my uncle somehow stoked that? Had he used Isolde as a tool to ensure I would be rejected, making me more desperate and easier to control? The depth of the conspiracy was staggering. "What do we do?" I whispered. Alistair's face was a mask of grim determination. "We do nothing. You will focus on yourself and our child. I will handle Silas Sterling. He has made a mistake by showing his face. Now I know he's still playing the game." He came to me, kissing my forehead. "Do not fear him, Elara. He is a scavenger picking at bones that have already been buried. This family is ours. No one will take it from us." His words were confident and I drew strength from them. But a seed of unease had been planted. The past was not as dead as I had hoped. The battle for the Vance legacy, it seemed, had simply entered a new, more shadowy phase. The following week, a package arrived for me at the estate. It was a small, elegantly wrapped box with no return address. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a tiny, exquisitely detailed silver rattle. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, wrong. There was no card. Dahlia, who had brought me the package, frowned. "Shall I have it checked, ma'am?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes." And Dahlia, discreetly. The security team scanned it. There were no explosives, no poisons. It was just a rattle. But when they looked closer, they found a nearly microscopic inscription etched into the silver handle. It was a family crest. But not the Vance crest. It was the Thorne family crest. A crest my uncle had adopted and that my father had abandoned. It was a message. A reminder of where I came from. A claim. Alistair's face was dark storm when he was told. He took the rattle and locked it in his safe. "A child's toy," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He seeks to threaten my child with a symbol of your bloodline. This will not stand." I didn't know what Alistair did next. He didn't tell me and I didn't ask. But Silas Sterling ceased to be a problem. A few days later, a brief article appeared in the financial section of the newspaper. A minor investor named Silas Sterling had suffered significant, sudden losses in several overseas ventures and was reportedly relocating indefinitely to manage his affairs abroad. The threat had been neutralized. For now. But the incident left a mark. It reminded me that peace was something that had to be vigilantly guarded. The ghosts of the past could still whisper, and there were always vultures circling, waiting for a moment of weakness. I placed a protective hand on my stomach, a new fierceness blooming within me. I had fought for this happiness, for this future. I would let no one, not a ghost from the past or a scavenger like Sterling, threaten it again. My pregnancy became my armor and my purpose. The unease melted away, replaced by a more profound sense of determination. This child would not grow up in the shadow of the old wars. It would inherit a legacy of peace, built by its parents, secured with love and, when necessary, unwavering strength. The neutralization of Silas Sterling should have been the end of it. We had reinforced the estate's security, vetted the staff again, and Alistair had his team monitoring any faint ripples in the business world that might indicate lingering loyalties to my uncle's cause. The days returned to their peaceful rhythm, focused on the impending arrival of our child. But the past, I was learning, was a scorpion. Even when you think it's dead, it can still have one last sting in its tail. The attack came from a direction I had never anticipated: the media. It started with a whisper. A popular, notoriously unscrupulous gossip blog ran a blind item about a reborn Cinderella from a dirt-poor family who had bewitched a powerful older tycoon by using dark secrets from his past. It was vague enough to be dismissed, but the timing and details were too specific to be about anyone else. Then a weekly tabloid published grainy long-lens photos of Alistair and me walking in a private garden, my pregnant belly clearly visible. The headline screamed, "Pregnant pawn? Is the Vance heir a prophecy baby or a power play?" The article was a masterpiece of insinuation. It dredged up the old, mostly forgotten prophecy, framing it not as a blessing but as a sinister plot. It hinted that I was not a willing bride but a pawn in my late uncle's game, and that my pregnancy was a calculated move to seize the Vance empire permanently. It quoted anonymous sources close to the disinherited Vance heirs, who spoke of my unnatural influence over Alistair and my cold, ambitious nature. The most damaging part was the inclusion of a distorted version of my first life's wedding disaster. They had pictures, not of the dress tearing, but of me looking distraught and humiliated on that altar, and framed it as a nervous breakdown and proof of my instability. They even had a quote from a former staff member, who described me as paranoid and prone to violent outbursts, clearly twisting the story of me slapping Cashin after the fire. It was Isolde's narrative, weaponized and fed to the press. I sat in the morning room, the stack of tabloids on the table, feeling like a toxic spill. My hands trembled. This was a different kind of attack than arson or kidnapping. This was aimed at my reputation, my sanity, and my right to be the mother of Alistair's heir. It was designed to isolate me, to make the world see me as a monster and my child as a tool. Alistair was livid. He stormed into the house, his phone glued to his ear, barking orders to his legal team. "I want every publication that printed these lies sued into oblivion. I want their sources uncovered and buried. I want retractions on the front page of every paper in the country." He swept the papers off the table in a fury I had rarely seen. "How dare they?" he growled, pulling me into a tight embrace. "How dare they speak of you? Of our child?" I wanted to be strong, to be the fierce woman who had faced down his sons, but this felt dirty, unfair. It crawled under my skin. "They're using my past," I whispered, my voice small. "The past I can't tell anyone about." "Your past is none of their business," he said fiercely. "Your past is what brought you to me. It is our strength, not their weapon." His legal onslaught was swift and brutal. Libel lawsuits were filed against the tabloid and the blog. Cease and desist orders were sent to every outlet that had picked up the story. But the damage was done. The whispers had started. I saw the curious, sometimes suspicious looks from people in the few public outings I still made. The foundation received a few letters questioning my fitness to lead their initiatives. Then the second wave hit. A video surfaced online. It was security footage, blurry and black and white, from the night of the fire. It showed Cashin lingering near my door, but the angle was cleverly edited to be ambiguous. It could be interpreted as him checking on the room, or it could be interpreted as him leaving it. The video was accompanied by a voiceover from another, anonymous source, asking, if she was so innocent, why did the heir seem so concerned about her room? What really happened that night? It was a masterstroke. It took my genuine victimhood and twisted it into a mystery, implying I might have been the instigator. I felt the walls closing in. The peaceful world we had built was being painted over with a brush of doubt and malice. The stress began to affect me physically. My doctor became concerned about my blood pressure, urging complete rest and calm, an impossibility given the circumstances. Alistair was a fortress, dealing with the external threat, but I could see the worry in his eyes every time he looked at me. He hired a private security detail just for me, not for physical protection but to create a buffer from the world. The breaking point came during a scheduled ultrasound appointment. As we left the private clinic, a pack of photographers descended upon us, their cameras flashing like strobe lights, shouting intrusive questions. Ilara, did you trap Alistair with a pregnancy? Is the prophecy real or did you make it up? Are you afraid you'll have a breakdown after the baby is born like you did at your first wedding? How do the Vance sons feel about you stealing their inheritance? Their voices were a jarring, cruel cacophony. Alistair shielded me, his face a mask of thunder as our security pushed them back. But one photographer lunged forward, his camera shoved right in my face. I stumbled back, a shock of fear lancing through me, my hand flying to my stomach. In that moment something in Alistair snapped. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply turned to the man, and the look on his face was so terrifyingly cold, so utterly devoid of mercy, that the photographer actually recoiled, lowering his camera. That was my wife you touched, Alistair said, his voice low and deadly calm, carrying over the sudden silence. And my child you frightened. Remember this moment. It will be the most expensive photograph you never take. The crowd went quiet. He guided me into the waiting car, his arm around me a solid, protective bar. Inside I finally broke down, the stress and fear pouring out of me in helpless sobs. That's it, Alistair said, holding me close, his voice thick with emotion. No more. We're not playing defense anymore. His counterattack was not legal this time. It was personal and it was brutal. He didn't go after the publications. He went after the source. Using every resource at his disposal, his investigative team traced the leaks. The anonymous sources were, as we suspected, all connected to Isolde. She had managed to bribe a corrupt guard to smuggle out messages to a slick ambulance-chasing lawyer who was acting as her intermediary with the press. Alistair didn't have the lawyer disbarred. He bankrupted him. He exposed every shady deal, every ethical violation, every hidden asset. The man was ruined within a week. Then he turned his attention to the tabloid editor who had spearheaded the smear campaign. He discovered the man was having a secret affair and was deeply in debt from a gambling addiction. Alistair anonymously bought up all his debts and then called them in simultaneously. The editor lost his job, his mistress, and his house. But the masterstroke was yet to come. He arranged for a full, exclusive, and tearfully honest interview with the very former staff member, who had given the quote about me being paranoid and violent. It was a young maid who had been briefly employed around the time of the fire. On camera, flanked by her parents and a lawyer we provided, she confessed that Isolde had coerced her into giving that false statement, threatening her family if she didn't comply. She described how Isolde had promised her money, how she had fed her the exact lines to say. The interview was picked up by a major, respectable news network. It didn't just retract the lie, it exposed the entire machinery of the smear campaign. Then Alistair released a statement himself. It was not from the CEO of Vance Industries. It was from a husband and expectant father. He spoke about the prophecy not as a sinister plot, but as an ancient family belief that had led him to me, the greatest blessing of his life. He spoke of his sons and adopted daughters' tragic flaws and their attempts to destroy the peace of our home. He didn't mention rebirth, he framed it as greed and madness. And he ended with a direct, unequivocal message. To those who seek to harm my wife or question the legitimacy of my child, you will face not just my lawyers but the full force of my wrath. I have spent my life building an empire. I will not hesitate to burn it down to protect my family. The effect was seismic. The public narrative flipped overnight. The story was no longer about a mysterious, ambitious bride. It was a classic tale of good versus evil, of a powerful man's devotion to his family, of a young woman slandered by jealous, corrupt rivals. I became a sympathetic figure. The Foundation was flooded with messages of support. The final sting of the scorpion had been drawn, and Alistair had not just neutralized it, he had crushed it underfoot. That night he held me as we watched the supportive news reports. The fear and stress that had gripped me for weeks finally began to recede. "You didn't have to go that far," I whispered, tracing the tired lines on his face. "Ruining those men." "Yes, I did," he said simply, kissing my hair. "They threatened what is mine. They frightened you. There is no line I will not cross to keep you safe. No cost is too high." He laid his hand on my stomach where our child was kicking softly as if in agreement. The war for our peace, it seemed, was finally, truly over. The world had chosen a side. And it had chosen us. The silence after the media storm was profound and sweet. The world, having devoured the drama and passed its judgment, moved on. The Vance name, after a period of intense scrutiny, emerged perhaps even stronger, its narrative now one of resilient love and fierce protection. The Foundation's donations soared, a public vote of confidence in my leadership. My pregnancy progressed into its final trimester. I bloomed, the initial stress replaced by a serene, powerful anticipation. The nursery adjacent to our room was prepared, a soft, airy space filled with light, books, and the beautiful, simple toys Alistair and I had chosen together. The sinister silver rattle was a forgotten nightmare, locked away in a safe. Alistair was a model of devoted anxiety. He attended every doctor's appointment, his large hand always finding mine during ultrasounds, his eyes fixed on the grainy screen with rapt wonder. He read parenting books on his tablet at night, his brow furrowed in concentration, and would then proceed to debate the merits of attachment parenting versus sleep training with me as if it were a critical corporate merger. "The data on cognitive development is fascinating," he'd murmur one evening, his arm around me as we rested on the sofa. "But this book suggests that a strict routine might impede emotional bonding. What's your operational assessment, Mrs. Vance?" I would laugh, snuggling closer. "My operational assessment is that our child will be loved, and we'll figure the rest out as we go." He'd hum in agreement, but I knew he'd be back on his tablet later, cross-referencing studies. His need to be prepared to be perfect for this child was endearing and utterly characteristic. We decided not to learn the baby's sex. This child was a miracle, a symbol of our future, and we wanted the surprise. We referred to the baby as Phoenix, a private joke and a testament to rising from the ashes of our pasts. As my due date drew near, the estate settled into a state of watchful readiness. Mrs. Croft had a constant supply of meals prepared for the freezer. Dahlia had the nursery spotless, the tiny clothes washed and folded with meticulous care. The security team was briefed on the hospital route and protocols. Everything was in order. The past felt truly distant, a closed book. The fates of Cassian, Julian, Felix, and Isolde were vague rumors from another life. We heard nothing and we sought nothing. Our world had narrowed to the peaceful confines of the estate and the thrilling, imminent arrival of our future. The first contraction hit in the middle of the night, a deep, tightening wave that pulled me from a dreamless sleep. I lay still for a moment, waiting, my heart beginning to drum against my ribs. When the second came, precisely 15 minutes later, I knew. I turned to wake Alistair and found him already awake, propped on an elbow, watching me in the moonlight filtering through the window. His hand was already resting on my stomach. "How?" he asked, his voice hushed with awe and instant alertness. I nodded, a smile breaking across my face. "Now." What followed was a whirlwind of controlled chaos that Alistair had doubtless rehearsed in his mind 100 times. He was calm, efficient, and utterly in command. He called the doctor, alerted the staff, helped me dress, and guided me to the car with a steadiness that belied the excitement I could feel thrumming through him. The drive to the private hospital wing was a blur of streetlights and his reassuring hand on my knee. He talked to me the entire time, his voice a low, steady rumble, telling me stories about his late wife's pregnancy with Cassian, funny anecdotes about his early business failures, anything to keep my mind focused and calm. The delivery was long and arduous. Alistair never left my side. He held my hand, mopped my brow, and followed the doctor's instructions with a seriousness that would have been comical if it weren't so deeply touching. When I finally, exhaustedly, pushed our child into the world, I was barely conscious. The first sound I heard was a strong, indignant cry. Then the doctor's smiling voice. "Congratulations. You have a son." Alistair's face, sweaty and pale with effort and emotion, appeared in my line of sight. Tears were streaming down his cheeks unchecked. He cut the cord with trembling hands, his eyes never leaving our son. They placed the baby on my chest. A warm, wriggling, perfect being with a shock of dark hair and Alistair's determined frown already etched on his tiny features. A love so fierce and instantaneous it stole my breath, washed over me. This was our victory. This was our peace. Alistair leaned down, kissing my forehead, then our son's. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "Look what we made." We named him Arthur, after Alistair's grandfather, a man known for his integrity and kindness. Arthur Alistair Vance. Bringing Arthur home was like bringing the sun into the house. The estate, once a place of shadows and intrigue, was transformed by the sound of his cries and his soft, milky scent. Alistair was a revelation as a father. The powerful CEO was utterly enslaved by this tiny human. He changed diapers with the focus of a bomb disposal expert, rocked Arthur to sleep with a patience I never knew he possessed, and would spend hours simply watching him sleep, a look of bewildered joy on his face. The promised grandest wedding was now replaced by the grandest christening. It was a smaller, more intimate affair than our wedding, but no less filled with love. We stood in the estate's small private chapel, surrounded by a handful of true friends and loyal staff, as Arthur was welcomed into the world. He wore the same christening gown that Alistair had worn, a delicate piece of lace and history. As the priest poured the water over his head, Arthur let out a small, surprised gurgle and everyone laughed. In that moment, surrounded by love and light, the last of the ghosts were laid to rest. The cycle was broken. The heir to the Vance legacy was not a product of prophecy or manipulation, but of love and choice. One afternoon, a few months after Arthur was born, I was nursing him in the conservatory. Alistair found us there, sitting down beside me and gently stroking Arthur's downy head. "I received a report today," he said quietly, his voice not unhappy, just factual. I looked at him, a question in my eyes. Cashin was involved in a fight in the prison workshop. He lost. He'll be in the infirmary for a week. He paused. Julian has been diagnosed with severe anxiety. He spends most days in his cell, refusing to come out. Felix has apparently found religion and writes long, rambling letters to the warden about repentance, which are promptly filed in the trash. I listened, feeling nothing. No schadenfreude, no pity. They were just facts, news from a distant country I had no desire to visit. "And Isolde?" I asked, not because I cared but because the story felt incomplete. Alistair's mouth tightened. "She was denied parole. Her behavior is described as erratic and manipulative. She has no visitors." I looked down at Arthur, his perfect, trusting face nuzzled against me. Their stories were tragedies of their own making, but they were not our story anymore. They were echoes in a canyon we had long since left. "They're gone," I said softly. Alistair nodded, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder. "Yes," he agreed. "They are." He leaned over and kissed me, then kissed our son's head. "We're here." And we were. The past was a closed book. The present was a warm weight in my arms. And the future, for the first time, felt entirely, blessedly ours. Years are curious things. They can feel like an eternity when you are suffering, and yet they slip through your fingers like sand when you are content. 5 years passed in a blissful blur of first steps, first words, and the quiet, profound joy of watching a child grow. Arthur was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, a perfect blend of his father's sharp intellect and, much to Alistair's amused chagrin, my stubbornness. He had Alistair's storm-gray eyes and my dark hair, and a laugh that could light up the entire estate. He was the undisputed sun around which our world revolved. The Vance empire continued to thrive under Alistair's steady hand, though he had begun to slowly, carefully delegate more. "I have more important investments to tend to," he'd say, pulling Arthur onto his lap to help review paperwork that was in reality colorful crayon drawings. I had expanded the foundation's work significantly, focusing on education and arts programs for children. It was my passion, my way of ensuring that the Vance name was associated with building futures, not just managing wealth. I often brought Arthur with me on site visits to new community centers or schools. I wanted him to understand from the very beginning that privilege came with responsibility. Our life was full, peaceful, and deeply ordinary in the most extraordinary way. The dark memories of my first life had faded, not forgotten but neutralized, their power dissolved by the overwhelming light of my present. One crisp autumn afternoon, we were in the estate's sprawling gardens. Alistair was trying to teach a 5-year-old Arthur the basics of cricket, with hilarious lack of success. I sat on a blanket watching them, a book forgotten in my lap, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. Arthur, wielding a bat almost as big as he was, swung with all his might and missed the ball entirely, spinning himself in a circle and landing on his bottom in the grass. Instead of crying, he burst into peals of laughter. Alistair dropped his own bat, scooped him up and tossed him into the air, both of them laughing uncontrollably. I watched them, this man and this boy, my family, and a wave of such profound gratitude washed over me that tears sprung to my eyes. This was the peace the fortune teller had promised. Not just for the family but for me. For us. Later, after Arthur had been carried inside, exhausted and happy for his bath, Alistair and I sat on the terrace, sharing a glass of wine as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "He's extraordinary," Alistair said, his voice soft with wonder. He wasn't just talking about Arthur's failed cricket skills. He was talking about his kindness, his curiosity, his unshakable sense of security. He was everything his uncles were not. "He has the best parts of us," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "He has you," Alistair corrected, kissing my hair. "His strength, his light, that's all you, Alara." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear. "I was thinking," Alistair said after a time, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more thoughtful. "The board is pushing for a more formalized succession plan." I tensed slightly. The idea of burdening Arthur with the weight of the empire before he could even read felt oppressive. "He's 5, Alistair." "I know," he said quickly, soothingly. "That's not what I mean. I mean for us. I'm not planning on going anywhere for a very long time," he added with a wry smile. "But I've been considering restructuring the trust. I want Arthur's inheritance to be irrevocably his, but held in trust until he's 30. And I want the voting rights for the majority shares to go to you in perpetuity." I sat up, stunned. "Alistair, that's too much. That's control of the entire company." "Precisely," he said, his gaze steady and serious. "I trust you, Alara. I trust your judgment, your heart, and your strength. I know you will guide the company with integrity and ensure that when Arthur is ready, he inherits not just wealth, but a legacy he can be proud of. You are the best of us. You are the peace." Tears filled my eyes again. This was more than love. This was the ultimate testament of his faith in me. He was entrusting me with the future of everything he had built. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, taking my hand. "The prophecy was right. You brought us peace. Not through subjugation but through love. You saved me, Alara. You saved this family. This is just paperwork making official what I already know in my soul." The following week the lawyers came. The documents were signed. It was done quietly, without fanfare. The Vance legacy was secure, not in the hands of a bloodline known for treachery, but in the hands of the woman who had redeemed it. That night I checked on Arthur before I went to bed. He was sleeping soundly, one arm thrown over his favorite stuffed dragon, his breathing deep and even. I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, my heart overflowing. I had come to this house expecting hell. I had found it, lived it, and died in it. And then I had been given the impossible gift of a second chance. I had fought for my life, for my love, for my future. And I had won. I walked back to my bedroom where Alistair was waiting for me. He opened his arms and I went into them, leaning into his solid, familiar strength. "He's asleep," I murmured. "Good," he said, holding me close. "All is right in the world." And it was. The past was a lesson, not a life sentence. The ghosts were silent. The house was quiet, filled only with the gentle sounds of the night and the peaceful breathing of our family. I had started my journey as a sacrificial pawn in a game I didn't understand. I had become the queen, the protector, the heart of the kingdom. And my son, my beautiful, happy, secure son, would never have to fight the battles I had fought. He would only know the peace. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not in the way anyone had expected. The century of peace had begun not with a marriage of convenience, but with a choice. A choice to love, to trust, and to build a new dawn from the ashes of the old. As I fell asleep in my husband's arms, I knew with absolute certainty that the story of Alara Thorne was finally over. And the story of Alara Vance, wife, mother, guardian of a new legacy, was just beginning. And it was going to be a beautiful story. The end.